I never expected Christmas dinner at my parents' house would end with me walking out. Alone. In the cold. Leaving them in complete silence behind me. But here we are. Let me introduce myself. I'm Audrey Thompson, 30 years old. By most people's standards, my life should have been picture perfect by now. I've got a steady job, a decent apartment, and a group of friends I trust. And yet, every time I walk into my parents' home, I feel like I'm still that 12-year-old kid begging for attention. The difference, this time, I decided I wouldn't beg anymore. You see, there's always been this unspoken rule in my family. Achievement is everything. And if you don't fit the mold, if you don't meet the success criteria, you're just, well, you're not enough. Not enough for their praise. Not enough for their approval. And for me, it's never been more obvious than at our annual Christmas dinner. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind a bit. Back to when I arrived at the house. The house, my parents' house, was as cold as it always is. It looked like something straight out of a holiday commercial. All perfectly decorated, with lights twinkling on the giant Christmas tree and presents stacked neatly under it. You know, the kind of house that looks perfect on the outside, but feels like a mansion of isolation once you're inside. That house had been in my family for generations, and it was a symbol of everything they valued. Tradition, success, appearances. I had my reservations about even attending this year. After all, every year felt the same, like a play where I had no lines. Just the same old scene. But I still went. Not for them, but for myself. I told myself this year would be different. This year, maybe, just maybe, I could break the mold they placed me in. I walked in after everyone else. My oldest brother, Connor, was already there, surrounded by his perfect wife and their 3 kids, laughing and shouting at each other as they set the table like they owned the place. My parents were bustling around the kitchen like always, pretending they had it all under control, while subtly reminding us that we were still children in their eyes. Then, there was my sister, Natalie, sitting there with her perfect smile, her perfect life, always making sure the spotlight stayed on her. And there I was, the other sibling, the one who'd never been married, the one without kids, the one who'd always been overshadowed. But that wasn't what hurt the most. No. What hurt was the way they looked at me. They didn't see an adult. They saw their youngest child. The one who could do no wrong. The one they still treated like a baby. When my mom saw me, her face lit up with that fake smile, the kind that makes you feel like you're not really welcome. Just tolerated. "Maya, sweetie," she called, opening her arms for a hug that felt more like an obligation than affection. "So glad you could make it. Go ahead. Grab a seat." I barely had time to reply before my dad's booming voice filled the air. "Dinner's ready. Connor, Natalie, get the kids settled." He sounded like he was giving orders to soldiers. Not family. I stood there for a second, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to make a scene. But that sting of being ignored. It was all too familiar. I wanted to say something, anything. But I just smiled weakly and did what I always did, slipped into the background. And then it happened. My mom, with her saccharine sweetness, turned to me and said, "Maya, why don't you sit at the kids' table? We've got a special spot for you with your cousins." I froze. Couldn't believe it. There I was, 30 years old, and she asked me to sit at the kids' table, the one with the mismatched chairs and the paper plates, the one no one ever took seriously. I glanced over at the adults' table, beautifully set with fancy china, glasses of wine, and candles. At the head of it sat my dad, smug as ever, surrounded by my married siblings, living their perfect lives. No room for me. Though, I looked back at my mom, struggling to hide the anger rising inside me. I could feel it like a pressure building, pushing against my chest. The familiar sting that always hit me when they treated me like I wasn't good enough. The difference this time, it was deliberate. They knew exactly what they were doing. Sure, Mom. Thanks, I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My mom smiled back, her eyes gleaming with that look that said she didn't really care how I felt. This wasn't about making me feel comfortable. This was about appearances, about keeping up the facade of a perfect family. And without another word, I walked over to the kids' table, my stomach turning with every step. It wasn't like I expected anything better. But for a moment, just a moment, I had hoped they would treat me like an adult. But no. I sat down in the little plastic chair, surrounded by toddlers who were more interested in their mashed potatoes than acknowledging my presence. I stared at the sloppy food in front of me, the mismatched plates, the half-hearted decorations. It wasn't even about the food. It was about the message. This wasn't a tradition. This wasn't about family. This was about them making me feel small, like I didn't matter. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about the table. This wasn't about tradition. This was about how they saw me, how they always had seen me, as nothing. I wasn't even worthy of sitting at the table with the rest of them. And for the first time, I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to play their game anymore. I stood up slowly, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. No words, no shouting, no scene. I just grabbed my coat, slung it over my shoulder, and walked straight for the door. As I opened it, I heard my mom's voice, almost too late. "Maya, where are you going?" she called, a hint of confusion in her tone, mixed with irritation. I didn't look back. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice colder than I expected. "Enjoy your dinner." The door slammed behind me, and I didn't look back. The cold air hit me like a wave, but I didn't care. I was free. Free from their expectations, free from their judgment. I drove for hours, aimlessly, until I ended up at a quiet diner. Sitting in a booth by myself, I ordered something warm, but my hands were still shaking from the adrenaline. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this much rage and relief all at once. That's when my phone started blowing up. Missed calls, texts, from my family, from Connor, from Natalie, even my dad. But there was one message that stood out. It was from my mom. "Where are you? We need to talk. This isn't funny." Maya. A smirk tugged at my lips, the kind that had been brewing inside me all evening. They had no idea what was coming next. But I wasn't going to pick up the phone yet. Not now. The ball was in my court. And trust me, they wouldn't like what I had planned. I set my phone down, took a deep breath, and sipped my coffee. The only thing I could think of was one thing. They had no idea what was about to happen. I didn't expect it to feel so liberating. But as I sat there in that dimly lit diner, the weight of everything I'd been carrying for years finally began to lift. I was alone, but I was also free. For the first time, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't trying to fit into a mold my family had crafted for me. I wasn't playing their game anymore. But that freedom, that moment of clarity, would soon be tested. Before I made my exit from their perfect little Christmas dinner, I had to take a step back and think. How did I get here? Let me take you back. I grew up in a house full of expectations. My dad, Howard, always had a plan for us, for everything. He was a corporate attorney, successful, ruthless in business, and he expected nothing less from his children. He didn't care about our dreams. He cared about what we could achieve. That was his world. That was his legacy. And then there was my mom, Eleanor. She wasn't as loud as Dad, but she was just as firm in her beliefs. She ran the household, making sure everything looked perfect. The family dinners, the Christmas gatherings, the vacations, it all had to be flawless. And the one thing they both agreed on was the definition of success. It was about the career. It was about the house. It was about the family you built. And somewhere along the way, I failed that test. I wasn't successful enough for them. It wasn't that they didn't love me. At least, not in the way they loved Connor, my older brother. He was the golden child, the one they could show off to everyone. He was the lawyer in the making, the one who always got top grades, the one they could parade around as the ideal child. My mom would always make sure to say, "If you had applied yourself like Connor, you could have had what he has." And there it was. The comparison. The one I could never escape. It wasn't just my parents. Either. My siblings were just as blind to my struggles. Connor and Natalie, my sister, both seemed to have their lives together. Their perfect careers. Their perfect relationships. They were everything I could never be. And every year, during family dinners, they made sure I knew it. When I showed up at Christmas dinner that year, they didn't just make it clear that I wasn't a part of their success narrative. They rubbed it in my face. I'll never forget that moment when my mom suggested I sit at the kids' table. It wasn't just a throwaway comment. No. It was a reminder that I wasn't seen as an adult. I wasn't seen as someone who had earned their place at the table with the grown-ups. And when I looked at the rest of the table at Connor, at Natalie, at their kids, I realized something. My parents weren't the warm, inviting type. They never cared to ask about my life, my work, or what mattered to me. I was just there. And when I tried to tell them about my latest promotion at work, or how I had managed to get a small but loyal following for my creative side projects, it was met with silence. They didn't understand. They didn't care. But they cared about Connor's latest deal. They cared about Natalie's perfect life, her perfect family. And there I was, sitting at the kids' table, pretending like I wasn't devastated, like it didn't sting. But it did. That moment, when my mom looked me dead in the eye and said, "Sit with the kids," something snapped inside me. I had put up with it for years. You know, the constant comparisons, the expectations that I never lived up to, the subtle digs and the overt praise for everyone else. But this time, I wasn't going to take it. I wasn't going to sit there like a passive observer, hoping for some sliver of recognition or validation. It was time for me to stop playing by their rules. Time to show them that I wasn't the little girl they thought they could ignore. I looked at my plate, the plastic cutlery, the paper napkins. I could hear the laughter of the kids around me, their innocent chatter, unaware of the tension hanging in the air. But it was there, thick and suffocating. Every laugh from the kids, every comment about the adults at the big table, made it worse. The realization hit me again, harder this time. They didn't respect me. Not one bit. And that's when I made the decision. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and left. No words. No fight. Just a single, quiet defiance. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to explain myself. The action spoke louder than any words ever could. The drive away from my parents' house was cathartic. In a way, I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. All I knew was that I needed space. I needed to think. I needed to get as far away from that house, from that family, as I possibly could. I ended up in a small diner on the edge of town, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline of what I'd just done. The waitress brought me coffee, and I stared at the steam rising from the mug, trying to calm my nerves. I'd been so angry for so long, trying to make them see me, trying to make them acknowledge that I was more than just a shadow in their lives. As I sat there, the weight of everything started to sink in. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. And that's when it started. The messages, the missed calls, the texts from my parents, from Connor, from Natalie. Everyone had noticed my absence, and they were freaking out. The one that stood out, though, was from my mom. It was a simple text, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. Where are you? We need to talk. This isn't funny. Maya. The old familiar pang of guilt tried to creep in, but I fought it off. They always wanted me to feel guilty. They always wanted me to fall in line. But not this time. Not anymore. I sat back in the booth, taking another sip of my coffee. A quiet smirk tugged at my lips. The ball was now in my court. But what would I do with it? It's funny how quickly the world can change. 1 minute, you're sitting at a family dinner, surrounded by all the people you're supposed to love. And the next minute, you're standing at the edge of your life, unsure of where the next step will take you. I thought walking out of my family's Christmas dinner would be the hardest part. But the truth is, it was only the beginning. Because once I drove away, leaving their voices behind me, I realized something that hit me like a freight train. I didn't just leave that dinner, I had left a lifetime of disappointment, resentment, and expectations. And I wasn't coming back. Over the next few days, I tried to put my thoughts in order. I took long walks by the lake, spent hours on my couch staring out the window. I even thought about calling a friend. But there was nothing to say. They wouldn't get it. My phone kept buzzing, and every time it did, my stomach twisted. Where are you? This is getting ridiculous. Maya, we need to talk about this. I didn't raise you to behave like this. Every single message felt like a jab, a reminder that I wasn't their Maya anymore. That person who showed up to dinner, who accepted their criticisms, who lived up to their expectations. She was gone. But it wasn't just my parents. Connor, my perfect older brother, started calling too. His texts were the worst. Mom's really upset. Maya, what's going on? Are you really going to let this ruin the family? And just like that, he pulled out the big guns family. The one thing that could always get to me. I hated him for it. But more than that, I hated myself for still caring. By the time the 4th day passed, I had made a decision. No more hiding. No more pretending. If they wanted to understand what I was feeling, they were going to hear it from me. All of it. The anger, the resentment, the years of holding my breath around them. Waiting for approval I would never get. I sent one last message to my mom and Connor. I'm done pretending. I've tried to fit into your world for years. And I've had enough. You've never seen me. You've only seen what you wanted me to be. I'm not that anymore. And then, I turned my phone off. Completely. The moment I hit send, my hands were shaking. The air around me felt like it was vibrating with anticipation. I knew I wouldn't be able to ignore their reactions. The fallout was coming. I could already feel the weight of it, pressing down on me. The next 24 hours felt like a lifetime. My phone stayed silent for the first time in days, and I took a breath I didn't even know I'd been holding. But the silence was only temporary. At 8:15 p.m. the following night, my doorbell rang. I froze. My heart skipped. It wasn't a normal ring. This was deliberate, insistent. I already knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. My mom. I didn't move. I could hear her outside, her heels clicking against the pavement, her muffled voice in the hallway. She was talking to someone, probably Connor, trying to convince him this was all just a phase. But I knew better. I'd heard that tone before. It was the one that said she was done. Done pretending. Done understanding. Done forgiving. And if she thought I was going to let her in without a fight, she was sorely mistaken. I walked to the door. I opened it. My mom stood there, her face framed by the glow of the streetlight behind her, her eyes wide with a mix of anger and disappointment. It was the same look I had seen countless times growing up, the look that made me feel like I was never enough. "Maya?" she started, her voice wavering slightly, as if she was unsure how to approach this conversation. I stepped back, crossing my arms. "I'm not going back. Not to your house. Not to your dinner. Not to your life. I've spent enough time trying to be what you wanted me to be." Her eyes softened for just a split second. But then the walls went back up. "You're being childish. This isn't about you, Maya. This is about family. It's about us." I shook my head. "No. It's about what you wanted me to be. It's about never listening to me. Never seeing me for who I am. Always comparing me to Connor. To Natalie. To everyone else but me." Her jaw clenched. "You think I didn't want you to be happy? You think I wanted to treat you like this?" "Yes," I said. "You did. And it wasn't just the dinner. It was every time you told me I wasn't good enough. Every time I sat at the kids' table, hoping you'd finally see me as your daughter. Not just an afterthought." Her face turned pale, and for the first time, I saw the guilt. It was fleeting, but it was there. And that made all of this worth it. The years of silence, the years of biting my tongue, the years of living in the shadow of everyone else's expectations. It was finally being heard. "Are you going to do this now?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Do you really think leaving will solve anything?" I stepped closer to her, standing taller than I ever had before. "Yes, because I'm done. I'm done being what you think I should be. I'm done begging for your approval. And you can either accept it or lose me for good." There was a long silence between us. Then, she said the words I had been expecting all along. "You're making a mistake. A huge one. You can't walk away from your family like this. Maya, you're going to regret it." But there it was, the crack in her voice, the weakness in her stance. She wasn't as sure of herself as she let on. And that was my moment. That was the moment I knew. The power had shifted. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't just walked away from dinner that night. I hadn't just left a party. I had left everything. Everything I had thought defined me. And it was the scariest, most liberating thing I had ever done. I could feel my phone buzzing in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know it was Connor. I didn't need to check the messages to know they were all desperate, pleading for me to come back. But I wasn't going back. Not now. Not ever. But the real question was, what would I do next? I had sent a message, but how far was I willing to go to make them realize I wasn't their perfect little daughter anymore? The silence in my apartment was deafening. The phone was still buzzing in my pocket. The messages coming in faster now. Each one from my family felt like an echo of the same desperation I had tried to ignore my whole life. They wanted me to come back. They wanted me to fix things. But the truth was, there was nothing to fix. I wasn't broken anymore. I had no intentions of picking up the phone. Not yet. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had control. Control over my story. Control over what came next. It wasn't just about walking away from that dinner. It wasn't even about leaving my family behind. It was about choosing myself for the first time, and that felt more empowering than anything they'd ever given me. But as much as I tried to focus on the freedom, there was something gnawing at the back of my mind, something deeper. I had walked out of their lives. Yes, but had I truly severed those ties? No. The answer was a resounding no. My parents, my siblings, they were still out there. They were still a part of my life, whether I liked it or not. And that meant the world they had built for me, the world they forced me into, wasn't just going to let me walk away. Not without a fight. I needed to be smarter than that. If I was really going to cut ties, I needed a plan. I had spent years feeling like I wasn't enough. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how many late nights I spent trying to prove myself, nothing seemed to matter. But now, I wasn't just going to let them have the last word. I knew I couldn't just disappear into the background. I had to make them see me. I had to make them understand that I wasn't some side character in their perfect little family drama. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. And that's when it hit me. The one thing they'd never expect. The one thing that would change everything. I would make them regret everything. It wasn't going to be easy, but it would be worth it. I needed to start with something they valued the most. Their reputation. Their perfect little family image. They thought they could just sweep me under the rug like I didn't matter. But I had something they didn't expect. The truth. And the truth would be my weapon. I pulled out my laptop. The cool glow of the screen lighting up the room. The clock on the wall ticked away. The only sound in the stillness. I took a deep breath. I started by gathering everything. Texts, emails, photos, anything that could show just how far they'd pushed me, how much they had lied to me, the subtle and not-so-subtle comments from my mom about my career, the constant comparisons to Connor, the way my dad would brush off my accomplishments like they were nothing. It was all there, stored away in my phone, in the corners of my mind. But I needed more, something that would really shake them to their core. That's when I thought about the family business, the one my dad ran, the law firm that had been in our family for generations, the one that, for years, had been built on the backs of clients who trusted my dad to represent them with integrity and honor. But what if they knew the truth about him? What if they knew about the things he had done behind the scenes? The shady deals, the people he had crushed to climb higher up the corporate ladder, the people he had used for his own gain. I'd heard whispers growing up. I'd seen things that didn't add up. But I'd always kept my mouth shut. After all, this was my family. But now, with everything on the line, it felt like the right time to bring those secrets to light, the ones they tried to hide for years. It would be risky, but if I wanted them to understand how it felt to be invisible, to be treated like nothing, I had to take this all the way. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The weight of what I was about to do settled over me like a thick fog. Was this revenge? Was this truly justice? No, it wasn't about justice. It was about recognition, about making sure my family knew, once and for all, that I wasn't their pawn to control. They wouldn't just see me, they would feel me. I knew there would be consequences. I knew this would change everything. But as I sat there, staring at the files on my screen, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was the moment where I took my life back. Just as I was about to hit send, I paused. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was from my brother Connor. I stared at the screen. His message was simple, but the urgency in it caught my attention. Mom's really upset. Please, just talk to her. We need to fix this. It hit me hard. I hadn't heard from him in days. But this felt different. It wasn't just about him being the perfect son, trying to keep up appearances for the family. This was him trying to get me back, trying to reel me in, because he knew what was coming. I felt a flicker of guilt. He was my brother, but the guilt was fleeting. I knew what I had to do, and I couldn't back down now. I hit send. The email was on its way to my mom, to my dad, and to the people who had manipulated me for years. I took a deep breath. My phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't from my family. It was from an unknown number. I looked at the screen. "You think you can hide the truth forever?" The message sent a chill down my spine. How did they know? Was this the beginning of something bigger than I had imagined? I didn't have time to think about it. I needed to focus. Focus on what was coming next. But who could be watching? Who else knew? I sat in the dim light of my apartment, the silence ringing in my ears. The message from the unknown number had shaken me. But I pushed the thought aside. I couldn't afford to be distracted now. The plan was set. My family had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't going to give them a chance to backpedal. They wanted me to stay in the shadows, to be the good daughter, to stay quiet while they continued their charade. Well, not anymore. I was done being their pawn. Now, it was time to make them see me. For real. I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen in front of me. It was surreal. This was it. The moment where I decided to turn the tables. The moment where I became the person my family would never expect me to be. The emails I'd sent had been the first strike. A simple, straightforward message. Nothing flashy. No grand gestures. Just the cold, hard truth. The things they didn't want to face. The things they had hidden from me. From everyone. But now, I needed more. A personal touch. A way to make it feel real. Something that would force them to confront not just the emails, but everything else. That's when the idea hit me. Uncovering the secrets. My dad had built his career on a reputation of being the perfect lawyer. The man who always knew what to say. The man who got things done. No matter what. But that wasn't the whole story. I had the documents. I had the proof of the shady deals. The ones my dad had hidden in his files. The ones I was never supposed to see. And now, they were my weapon. I wasn't doing this for revenge. Though, not just revenge. Anyway, I wasn't trying to hurt them. I just needed them to understand that their actions had consequences. That they couldn't keep running their lives and treating me like a second-rate player in their game. No. This time, I was taking back control. With shaking hands, I opened the encrypted folder on my laptop. Inside were the receipts, the contracts, the private conversations that my dad had been hiding. There was no turning back now. I printed out a few of the most damning pages and made sure everything was in order. I double-checked everything had to be sure. I couldn't afford to mess this up. The next day, I headed to the family law firm, the one my dad had built with his own hands. It was the center of everything they believed in. Success. Power. Control. It was their fortress. And it was about to come crumbling down. I walked in like I owned the place. Like I'd done it 1,000 times before. The receptionist, a friendly woman who had been there for years, looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Miss Thompson, how can I help you today?" she asked. A little too cheerful. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my chest, but I forced a smile. "I need to see my dad's office." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, probably assuming I was there for something routine, like I had been in the past. She led me down the hall to his office, not asking questions. As she unlocked the door for me, as I stepped inside, the familiar scent of leather and paper hit me, and for a moment, it almost felt like nothing had changed. But it had. Everything had changed. I sat down at my dad's desk, the seat that he had spent years behind, making decisions that had affected so many people. I looked at the file drawer, knowing exactly where to find what I needed. I wasn't just there to take revenge. I was there to make him see me, to make him face the truth. I opened the drawer, my fingers trembling slightly as I reached for the folder marked Confidential. The truth had been hidden in these files for years. But today, I was going to expose it. Just as I was flipping through the pages, I heard the door open behind me. My heart stopped. It was my dad, Audrey. His voice was calm, controlled. The voice of a man who had always been in control. "What are you doing here?" I stood up slowly, turning to face him. The man who had never truly seen me. The man who had built his empire on lies. Had the nerve to look at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "What do you think I'm doing here?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger, and something else, something deeper, more powerful than I had ever felt before. It was like I finally had the strength to stand up for myself, to demand answers. He took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You need to leave. This is ridiculous." "No, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "It's not ridiculous. What's ridiculous is how you've treated me my entire life. It's ridiculous that you thought you could get away with everything, and that I wouldn't notice. But I did. I've been watching, and now, it's time for you to answer for it." He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and anger. "You don't know what you're talking about. Get out of my office." But I wasn't done. I threw the folder onto the desk, the papers spilling out onto the surface. "You know what this is? These are the lies you've built your entire career on. You thought I didn't know? You thought I didn't see what you were doing behind closed doors? Well, guess what? I do." His face drained of color as he looked at the documents, his hands trembling just slightly as he reached for the papers. He wasn't as calm as he wanted me to think, and that's when I knew I had won. The tension in the room was palpable. My dad stood there, staring at the papers, his jaw clenched. His facade was cracking. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. "Do you want to know why I walked out of Christmas dinner?" I asked, my voice rising with the frustration I'd been holding inside for years. "Because I'm done being your puppet. I'm done being the invisible daughter. I'm done with all of it." He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the mess I had created. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. This wasn't just about proving a point to them. This was about taking my life back. But as I turned to leave, I heard a soft voice behind me. "You think this is over?" I stopped. It was Connor. And he wasn't alone. The air in my dad's office felt thicker than ever. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, and every passing second seemed to add more weight. Connor's voice was the last thing I expected to hear behind me. But when I turned, I saw him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I could feel my heart pounding, the blood rushing to my face. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood a figure I hadn't seen in years, my mother. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, like she had just witnessed a train wreck and was still trying to make sense of it. They must have come in together. After I'd started confronting Dad, for a split second, I thought about running, just walking out of the room, letting them deal with the mess I had made. But I couldn't. Not now. Not when I was finally standing up for myself after all these years. "Are you proud of yourself?" "Maya." Connor's voice cut through the silence. Low and controlled, but with a sharp edge that made my stomach churn. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "Proud? I'm not doing this for pride. I'm doing this because I'm done. Done letting you and everyone else walk all over me." Mom stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor, the sound echoing through the room. Her expression was a strange mix of disbelief and anger, the kind of look a parent gives when they can't understand why their child is acting out of line. She was always so composed, so calculated, but in this moment, I could see her facade cracking. It wasn't about family anymore. It was about control. Her control. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, her voice trembling with a restrained fury. "You don't know what you're doing. You're destroying everything. Everything. You destroyed everything a long time ago." I shot back, my voice rising without warning. "You made me feel like I didn't matter. You and Dad made it clear every single day that nothing I did was enough." Her face flushed with a mix of shame and fury. But instead of backing down, she squared her shoulders. "That's not true. You don't understand what it means to protect this family, to uphold the legacy we've built. Protect it." I scoffed. "You've been protecting your own image. Not me. You've been protecting your own perfect life while I've been left to rot on the sidelines." Connor stepped forward, his expression hardening, his posture rigid. "Enough. Maya, you think you can just tear everything down because you're angry? You're making a huge mistake." I shook my head. "No, I'm not making a mistake. I'm fixing things. You all have no idea what it's like to be invisible in your own family, to watch you two, all of you, live in your perfect little bubble. While I had to pretend that everything was fine, that I didn't care that you ignored me, that I didn't care when you belittled everything I did." Mom stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maya, you're throwing your entire future away for what? For this. You'll regret it." But I didn't back down. I had already walked away from their expectations. I had already walked away from their toxic version of family. I wasn't about to go back. "I'm not the one who's throwing everything away, Mom," I said, my voice steadier now, more resolute. "You and Dad did that years ago, when you decided that I wasn't worth your time, that I didn't matter unless I was just like Connor or Natalie. I have spent my whole life trying to fit into your perfect picture. But that's over now. I'm done trying to please you." Connor clenched his fists at his sides, but his voice was surprisingly calm when he spoke again. "You think this will fix everything? Do you really think airing out dirty laundry is going to make things better?" I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "It's not about making things better. It's about making you see me. It's about making everyone see me for who I am, not just the child you think I am. I've spent my life being silenced by all of you, by your standards, by your expectations. I won't be silenced anymore." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a dare. And for a moment, I saw something flicker in Connor's eyes. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Guilt. A crack in the armor that he wore so well. But before I could let it sink in, my mother spoke again, her voice sharper this time. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about you and your little rebellion. This is about the family's reputation, the legacy. What you're doing right now is tearing that down." "I'm tearing it down." I laughed bitterly. "You've been tearing it down for years. What do you think this whole perfect family act is? It's a lie. It's been a lie. And I'm done playing along." Mom's eyes flickered toward Dad, who had been silent this entire time, sitting in the corner of the room, his face ashen. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, and his lips were pressed into a thin line, as though he was fighting to keep his composure. "You have no idea what you're doing." Dad finally spoke, his voice hoarse, but there was a crack of fear in it that I'd never heard before. "Maya, this isn't just about family. This isn't just about us. This is about your future. You can't just throw it all away because you're angry." I stared at him, the man who had spent so many years pushing me to be something I was never meant to be, the man who had crushed me with his expectations, with his relentless need for perfection. I had spent so much of my life trying to please him, trying to win his approval, trying to be the daughter he wanted me to be. But I wasn't that girl anymore. "I'm not throwing anything away, Dad," I said, my voice steady, but full of conviction. Just as I turned to leave the room, something stopped me. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with an incoming call. The name on the screen made my heart race. Jason. What did he want? And why now? I glanced back at my family, their faces a mix of anger, disbelief, and something else. Was it fear? Was it finally sinking in that I wasn't the same person they could control anymore? I didn't answer, but I knew this was far from over. It's funny how a single moment can change everything. I sat there, my phone buzzing in my hand, staring at the name on the screen. Jason. It felt like a punch to the gut, unexpected, unwanted, and exactly the kind of complication I didn't need. But as I looked back at my family, still standing there in stunned silence, something inside me snapped. This wasn't about him. This wasn't about them. This was about me. When I first walked out of that dinner, I thought it was just a rebellion, a reaction to years of neglect. But now, it felt like I had been carrying the weight of my entire life. The guilt, the hurt, the unspoken fear that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. Maybe I was throwing away something that was important. But as I sat there in the tense silence, I realized something that hit me like a freight train. I wasn't just running away from my family. I was running toward myself, toward a version of me I had buried for years. And when I turned that phone off, when I made the choice not to respond to Jason's call, I knew that no matter how messy this was going to get, I couldn't let them back in. Not without some kind of reckoning. They had taken so much from me for so long. It was time for them to give something back. What is it going to take for you to see? My mom said, her voice trembling, but still filled with that same sternness that had been a part of her for as long as I could remember. This is our family. Maya, we've worked so hard to build this. Don't you dare tear it down. I met her gaze, unwavering, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small under her stare. No, Mom, you don't get it, I said, my voice calm, but fierce. I didn't tear anything down. You did. You've been tearing me down my whole life, making me feel like I wasn't good enough. And now, I'm taking back control. I don't owe you anything. Connor stepped in, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. You think walking away from all of this is the answer? That you can just leave and make everything okay? You're going to regret this, Maya. You're destroying everything we've worked for. I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated. I'm not destroying anything. I'm building something for myself, something you've never seen, because you've never bothered to really look. You just assumed I'd always be here, in your shadow, being what you wanted me to be. But I'm not anymore. There was a time when I would have crumbled at their words, when I would have run back to the safety of their approval, even if it meant losing myself in the process. But now, it was different. As I stood there, face to face with my family, I realized I was finally holding the one thing I had never had before. Power. Not the power to control them. Not the power to get revenge. But the power to define myself. To stop allowing their expectations and judgments to shape who I was. And I couldn't help but think of the papers. The ones I had printed out. The ones that had exposed my father's secrets. His lies. Those papers weren't just documents. They were a symbol of everything I had been through. Everything I had survived. They were my weapon. My truth. And now, the people who had used their power to hurt me were about to see what that truth could do. Jason's call and the unexpected twist. I had just begun to walk away from the confrontation when the phone buzzed again. I glanced down and saw the message from Jason, my ex. I hadn't thought about him in days. But now he was back, right at the worst possible time. He had always been a part of my past that I wished would just fade away. But he never did. He'd left me once. And now, like everything else in my life, he was back with a vengeance. Maya, I messed up. I need to talk. Can we meet? For a moment, I felt a flicker of something deep inside, a mixture of pain, regret, and curiosity. But then, just as quickly, it disappeared. I was done with being pulled back into past relationships that didn't serve me. And Jason, he was a reminder of my mistakes, my fears. He didn't get to rewrite my story. But as I prepared to shut off my phone, something happened. Something that made me hesitate. Another message from Jason popped up. Just as I was about to block him. Maya, there's something you need to know. Something about your dad. That caught my attention. It was a message I couldn't ignore. I paused, my thumb hovering over the block button. My heart skipped a beat. Was this a trick? Was he just trying to get me back into his orbit? Or was there something real behind his words? Something I needed to hear. I clicked on the message. Your dad's been hiding something. I know you won't believe me, but you should at least hear me out. My mind raced. My dad had been the center of all this pain, all this confusion, all this manipulation. But what could Jason possibly know that I didn't already suspect? What could he tell me that would shake me even more than everything I had uncovered? I didn't know if I was ready for it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. I walked out of the office, my family still in the background, reeling from everything I'd just thrown at them. But now, there was something else hanging in the air, a shadow over my plans, over my victory. The message from Jason, the truth about my father. I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. But I knew one thing for sure. Sure. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not until I knew the full story. As I stepped into the night air, I realized that the storm I'd started wasn't done yet. The secrets, the lies, they were still out there, waiting to be uncovered. I took a deep breath, staring at the street ahead of me. I had no idea what was coming next, but I knew I couldn't stop now. There were too many answers left to find. But what was the truth? And would it destroy me before I could destroy them? I stood there in the cool night air, the weight of the city pressing against my chest. Everything felt surreal, like I was caught between two worlds. One where I was the daughter of a perfect family, perfect on the outside, shattered on the inside, and another where I was finally myself, no longer bound by their expectations. But even as I took those steps away from the toxic traditions, from their endless demands, a part of me was still lingering in the past where they still held power over me, the past where I allowed them to define me. That message from Jason, there's something you need to know, something about your dad. The weight of it crushed down on me, the uncertainty gnawing at my insides. Could I ignore it? Should I? But what if the truth, whatever it was something I could never come back from? I had already taken so much from them, so much power, so much of their control. But could I really live with myself if I didn't uncover what Jason knew? If I didn't confront the last remaining lie in my life, the one that had come from the man who had always been my hero, my father. I pulled out my phone again, my hands trembling as I stared at Jason's message. My thumb hovered over the screen. Should I reach out? Should I get involved in this messy web of family secrets one last time? Could I really handle what I might find out? I didn't know the answer. But one thing was clear. I couldn't walk away just yet. Not with that hanging over me. I texted Jason back. Meet me tomorrow. Tell me everything. And then, for the first time in years, I put my phone down, closing my eyes as I exhaled. I didn't feel lighter. I didn't feel relieved, but I felt like I was finally moving forward. even if the truth threatened to pull me back in. The next day, I sat across from Jason in a small cafe in the heart of the city. The air between us was thick, charged with the weight of everything unspoken. He looked different, older, wearier, like the weight of the past had caught up with him too. "Maya, you're not going to like this," he said before I even sat down. His voice was low, serious, a warning. I nodded, the lump in my throat growing. "Tell me anyway." He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room before locking on mine. "Your dad wasn't just running a law firm. He was involved in more than just shady business deals. There's a connection to some dangerous people. People who, well, they don't care about family. They don't care about anything. And your dad was neck deep in it." My heart raced. My world spun. I had always known there were things I didn't understand. Things I wasn't allowed to know. But this, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one step forward could change everything. Jason paused, and I could feel the weight of his silence. "Your dad's been keeping secrets that have been affecting everyone. If you push him too far, if you dig too deep, it could all come crashing down." I felt my pulse quicken. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I had walked away from the dinner, from the house, from the life they had built around me. But this was something else. Jason reached into his bag, pulling out a manila envelope. He slid it across the table toward me. "I didn't want you to find out this way, but this is the truth. The whole truth." I picked up the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were documents, photos, names I didn't recognize, but they were connected to my father. My heart raced as I flipped through the pages. Each one seemed to draw me deeper into a world I had never wanted to be a part of. Jason's eyes were filled with something I couldn't place. Regret. Sympathy. He looked away as I processed what I had just seen. "I'm sorry, Maya," he said softly. "I didn't want this for you. But you need to know." I left the cafe with more questions than answers. But one thing was undeniable. I couldn't unsee what I had just learned. My dad wasn't just a man with flaws. He wasn't just a father who failed me. He was someone much darker. Someone who had tied my life and my family's reputation to forces I could never have imagined. The truth had a weight all its own. And now it was my burden to carry. The next step wasn't clear. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with all of this. Confront him. Expose him. Or just leave it all behind and walk away for good. I didn't have the answers yet. But what I did know was that I couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything I had learned. Not after everything I had fought for. I wasn't going to be their puppet anymore. I wasn't going to live in their shadow, their lies, their perfect facade. And then, just as I was about to leave the cafe, my phone buzzed again. It was from my mom. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into, Maya. But you will. And when you do, it will be too late." My heart dropped. I looked at the phone, and for the first time, I didn't know what was going to happen next. Was this the moment everything fell apart? Or was it the moment I finally took control of my life? The answers were out there, but I wasn't ready to face them. Not yet. Story 2. I'm James, 36. And this morning, on what was supposed to be my first Father's Day without my dad, I wasn't even allowed inside the chapel. I stood outside St. Bartholomew's, suit clinging to my back in the humid Denver air, holding the one thing I had left of him, his old hiking hoodie. The green one with the faded zipper. The one he wore the day he carried me down Bear Creek Trail when I twisted my ankle. He'd laughed the whole way. Tough men don't limp, they improvise. Inside the chapel, they were carrying his casket. And I wasn't one of them. I wasn't on the funeral program. I wasn't listed as a pallbearer. My name? His son's name wasn't even read aloud. Instead, I watched through the chapel doors, just wide enough to see my stepbrother Tyler giving a eulogy like he knew the man, like he'd earned that podium, like he hadn't vanished for 4 years until hospice care started cutting checks. If you've ever had someone erase you from your own bloodline, you know that sting, that hollow pull in your chest that no breath can fill. If you've ever been made invisible in your own family, I want you to stay with me, like this video. Comment below if you've felt it, and hit subscribe because I promise you, this story isn't over. Not by a long shot. Let me tell you how we got here. Dad was my rock. His name was Walter, and he built everything he had from scratch, including the 2-story brownstone we lived in and the cabinet-making business he ran for 27 years. He wasn't perfect, no, Dad is, but he showed up. Every birthday, every flu season, every time I crashed my bike into the neighbor's mailbox. When I was 10, he remarried. Eliza. Beautiful. Calculated. Always knew the right thing to say in public. And with Eliza came Tyler, her golden boy. All-state lacrosse. Always the lead in school plays. Posted inspirational quotes on Instagram like they were gospel. Tyler and I were never close. He called me stepson even when referring to me around my dad, like I was the one who didn't belong. Dad tried to play peacemaker, but Eliza was quick to draw lines, always with a smile. James is a thinker, she'd say. Tyler's more of a doer. We need both. It sounded like praise. It wasn't. But I didn't fight it. I focused on school, earned my architecture degree, and started working remote so I could stay close when Dad's health began to slip. I became the Sunday routine grocery runs, medical appointments, watching reruns of Frasier while eating his low-sodium chili. Tyler. He was busy. Too busy to return calls, but not too busy to post from golf resorts. Dad never said much about it, but I saw it in his eyes when he'd ask, "Did Tyler call today?" And I'd have to lie. He's probably tied up. I'm sure he'll call soon. The decline was slow. First, it was trouble climbing stairs. Then came the cough, the fatigue, the quiet way he started forgetting his keys. Then names. Then entire weeks. Eliza called it normal aging. I called it denial. But when the diagnosis came, advanced lung cancer, no one could deny anything anymore. That's when the shift started. Eliza became the primary contact. Tyler was suddenly back booking meetings with doctors, handling hospice arrangements. I was still there, but less involved. They'd accidentally forget to copy me on the group emails. One time, I showed up to the hospital and found Dad relocated to a new room. Tyler said, "Oh, didn't you get the update?" Then chuckled. Eliza claimed it was just confusion. "You're so emotional lately." James, maybe it's stress. Or guilt. Guilt. I sat in that sterile hospital room, holding Dad's hand, watching him sleep under fluorescent lights, and wondered if this was how legacy dies. Not with a bang, but with a reshuffling of access permissions and passive-aggressive emails. Then came Father's Day. It was my first without him. And I needed air. Closure. I dressed early, grabbed the hoodie. Yeah? I know. Who wears a hoodie to a funeral? But it wasn't just clothing. It was ours. When I arrived, the parking lot was full. I walked toward the chapel doors. And that's when Maggie, my oldest friend, the kind who reads your silences better than your words, stopped me. She looked uncomfortable, biting her lip, holding a folded program. They said, "You're not on the list." "James." I laughed. Thought she was joking. She wasn't. Eliza told the funeral staff it's immediate family only for the seating and eulogies. No disruptions. No disruptions. I repeated. I'm his son. I know. She lowered her voice. But Tyler told them you hadn't been around in years. That you left the family. He even said you and Walter were estranged. My throat tightened so fast I nearly choked on it. That's a lie. I know, Maggie whispered. I was there every week. So were you? But they made it official. She handed me the program. Tyler's photo was on the back, not Dad's. That was the moment it clicked. They didn't just cut me out emotionally. They cut me out legally, publicly, permanently. The hoodie in my hand suddenly felt heavier, like a relic from a forgotten truth. I took a few shaky steps toward the chapel. The ushers blocked my way with polite hands and blank faces. Family only, sir. And that's when I saw it through the crack in the doorway. Tyler standing at the podium, smiling like a son who'd been there through it all. My stomach turned. I backed away slowly, down the steps, into the heat. Maggie followed. You okay? She asked. No, I wasn't. But what I said was, I'm going to make sure he doesn't get away with it. She blinked. James, what are you thinking? I looked down at the hoodie again. There was something crumpled inside the pocket. Paper. I reached in. It was a receipt. From 2 weeks before Dad died. For a legal courier service. The name on the document, Walter J. Miller. And beneath that, in scribbled pen, final draft, for James. Hold until delivery. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stared at the receipt like it might catch fire in my hand. Courier service. Next day, legal logistics. Client. Walter J. Miller. Delivery status. Held pending final signature. The back of my neck prickled. Dad had tried to send me something. Something official. 2 weeks before he died. And it never came. I looked at Maggie, whose face had shifted from sympathy to something sharper focused. She reached for the paper, studied the name, the date, then met my eyes. James, do you know what this is? I have an idea, I said. Heartbeat climbing. But I need to be sure. She nodded slowly. Then we start there. 2 days later. I found myself in the back booth of a coffee shop off Pearl Street. Maggie had pulled some strings a favor from a paralegal friend and got us an unofficial check on the courier company's internal system. What we found nearly knocked the wind out of me. The item Dad tried to send was categorized as a revised will declaration. It was scheduled for next day delivery, but was canceled by secondary power of attorney override. That override, executed by Tyler. My stepbrother legally blocked my father's final document from reaching me, and I hadn't even known he had that kind of access. Maggie looked up from her laptop, lips pressed thin. That override. It's only possible if your dad was declared incompetent to make decisions, and that has to be backed by a physician's note. I blinked. So you're saying Tyler convinced someone that Dad wasn't mentally sound just in time to stop the will? She nodded. And that means 2 things. 1. There was a new will. And 2. They buried it. Outside the cafe window, a family walked past, a father pushing a stroller, toddlers squealing with joy. It felt cruel, like the universe was showing me a version of the life I thought I had once. That night, I pulled out the old hiking hoodie again, the one that now felt like armor. As I slipped it on, I felt something in the other pocket. Not the receipt this time, something softer. Folded paper. I pulled it out, unfolded it, and my breath caught. It was a sketch done in pencil. Crude but unmistakably my dad's hand. A cabin. Our cabin. The place he always said he wanted to retire to. Below it, his scrawl. Cabin stays with James. Let them fight over the house. He deserves peace. I held that note like it was a relic. Not legally binding. Maybe? But it was my father's truth in ink. On paper. Unfiltered. A piece of his soul. Scribbled in the corner of a hoodie pocket. Because he must have known no one would let it reach me otherwise. That's when I knew. I had to find the real will. The official one. And fast. Over the next week, I retraced every place Dad had been during his final months. The hospice care center was my first stop. I spoke with a nurse named Colleen. Maybe early 50s. Soft-spoken, but sharp. She recognized my name immediately. "You're Walter's boy," she said. "He talked about you every week." Her eyes watered, and mine nearly followed. "Do you know if he ever brought papers here?" I asked. "A folder. Envelope." She frowned, thinking. "He kept a small lockbox under his bed. Said it had peace of mind stuff." After he passed, Tyler and his mother took it. Said they were the only family listed. Of course they did. But then Colleen added something I didn't expect. "He asked me once," she said, "how to make sure a letter couldn't be intercepted." I told him. Certified mail or hand deliver it. But he said he couldn't trust anyone in the house. My throat tightened. Colleen leaned closer. He told me, "James is the only one who checks on me. Everyone else checks on what I have." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you." She looked down, as if weighing something, then reached into her pocket. "I probably shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. She handed me a Post-it. A number. That's the contact for a hospice chaplain. He said Walter left something behind. I blinked. Like, spiritually. She gave a small smile. Not exactly. I called that number before I even got back to my car. The chaplain, Reverend Simmons, met me the next morning in his modest office behind the chapel wing. He was older, gentle-eyed, and wore a silver cross that seemed worn with time. Walter was meticulous, he said. Said he didn't trust anyone with paper except someone not in the will. He asked me to hold on to something. He opened a small drawer and took out a sealed envelope. My name was written in my father's shaky hand. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a notarized affidavit, dated 10 days before his death. To whom it may concern. Walter J. Miller. Am of sound mind and body. I intend to name my biological son, James Miller, as primary beneficiary of my estate and property, including but not limited to the cabin at Echo Ridge and my business holdings. Then, his signature, and, attached to it, a scanned email draft. The one he tried to send to the legal courier. This wasn't just sentiment anymore. This was legal, and Tyler had done everything in his power to kill it. I brought it to Maggie the next morning. She took one look and whispered, "You have grounds, not just to contest, to win, but it's not the final signed will." I said, "Only his intent. Intent matters," she said, "especially when the current will is contested under suspicious circumstances. If you can prove Tyler manipulated access, we have a case." I sat back in her office chair, hoodie still on despite the heat. The weight of grief, of betrayal, and of truth all sitting heavy on my chest. "I don't want revenge," I muttered. She nodded. "I know. You want justice." I looked at her. "No," I said. "I want him to feel what I felt, erased. Forgotten. Like a footnote in his own life." Maggie leaned forward, voice firm. Then let's make sure your father's real story is heard. And Tyler's version, buried. That night, I walked into the brownstone, my childhood home. The walls felt tighter, the air stale. I opened the hall closet to find the family albums, but what I saw instead made my blood run cold. An entire box labeled Walter Archived. Empty. Just a note on top. Moved to digital. Asked Tyler for access. They had digitized Dad. Filtered. Approved. And locked. But I knew something they didn't. You can't filter everything. Especially not what's coming. Because I wasn't just going to contest the will. I was going to rebuild the truth piece by piece. And when I was done, Tyler wouldn't just lose the house. He'd lose the illusion that he was ever the son my father loved most. Cut to black. Tyler always played clean on the surface. That was his whole trick. His Instagram looked like a Hallmark card. Him hugging Dad at a charity banquet. Him holding a hammer during a Habitat for Humanity build. Him grinning with Eliza beside a sign that said, "Family is forever." All curated. All timed. His entire persona was one polished performance, and for most of Dad's later years, I had been too worn out, too loyal to reality, to compete with the fiction. But now, fiction was all he had, and I was about to tear it apart, frame by frame. Maggie and I started with the hospice timeline. If Tyler used legal override to block Dad's final will, we needed proof that he'd overstepped, or worse, manipulated Dad's mental status. She filed a request for all medical records tied to Dad's capacity evaluations. Meanwhile, I combed through the digital copies of Dad's emails. We recovered through a backup Maggie's contact had found, turns out. Tyler hadn't wiped everything clean. Dad had written several messages in his last month. Some short, some heartbreaking. James came today. We talked about Echo Ridge again. I hope I can still get the paperwork to him. Tyler said I need to relax and let the lawyers decide. But it's my life, my land. Eliza keeps asking me what I remember. I told her I remember everything. I read that last one 5 times. I could see his handwriting in my mind. Shaky but stubborn. He remembered. They just didn't want him to. We needed one more thing. A witness. Someone who saw what Tyler and Eliza were doing. So I called Rick, Dad's best friend and old business partner. Retired now. But still sharp. Still skeptical. James. He said when I showed up at his porch. I was wondering when you'd come knocking. He poured 2 iced teas and sat across from me. The sun bouncing off his bald spot. You want to know what really happened the last 3 months? Don't you? I nodded. Rick sighed. Walter told me he was afraid. Not of dying. Of being erased. That word again. He said Tyler and Eliza kept moving his appointments. Said he wasn't allowed to see his own mail. And get this, Tyler had the lawyer change the mailing address on all the business statements to his condo. I clenched the cup in my hand. He told me, Rick went on, that if anything happened to the new will, you'd find proof in the one place they'd never think to look. I blinked. Where? Rick chuckled. The man was old school. Said, the truth doesn't live online. No. Check his safe in the Echo Ridge cabin. That cabin had been a ghost for years. Dad and I used to go there every summer when I was a kid. It wasn't fancy, no Wi-Fi. No TV. Just firewood. Lake air. And stories by lantern light. The kind of place Tyler wouldn't last 5 minutes in. But it was Dad's sanctuary. And if there was any part of his soul left unfiltered by Tyler's narrative, it would be there. The next morning, I drove 3 hours through pine-covered highways, past a faded sign. Echo Ridge, Pop, 342. When I unlocked the cabin door, the air hit me like memory. Cedar, dust, A trace of that same cologne Dad wore for 20 years now, just clinging to the corners. Everything was exactly how I remembered. Almost. The family photos were gone. The bookshelf emptied. The carved sign over the mantel "Miller Men Make Their Way" had been taken down. Only the nails remained. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was erasure. And yet, there it was, the old floor safe under the woven rug, half concealed by an unused wood stack. I opened it, heart pounding. Inside, a black leather folder, heavy, unlabeled. And beneath it, a dusty photo, me and Dad fishing on the dock, his hand resting on my shoulder, both of us sunburnt and laughing. I swallowed hard. Then I opened the folder. The contents hit like a hammer. A sign, notarized, will dated later than the one on file. It matched the draft we'd seen in Dad's affidavit, except this time it was complete. It listed me, James Miller, as primary heir, Echo Ridge, the business stake, even the Denver house. Tyler and Eliza, mentioned only to receive a one-time payout in gratitude. The legal signature was clear. Witnessed. 2 names I recognized, a notary and a neighbor from the cabin community. My hand shook as I placed the folder in my backpack, zipped it up, and stepped outside. That's when I saw it. A black SUV, parked halfway up the gravel driveway, engine running. Someone was watching. I ducked back inside, pulled the curtain slightly. The figure in the driver's seat slim, sharp shoulders, phone pressed to her ear. Eliza. She'd followed me. She knew. I stood frozen for a moment, heart hammering like a snare drum. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You found something. Didn't you? Her voice ice wrapped in silk. I don't know what you're talking about, I replied, forcing calm. James, she said sweetly. Be careful. These things can get messy. And then she hung up. By the time I stepped outside again, the SUV was gone. But the warning was loud and clear. They weren't just planning to win. They were planning to bury the truth again. Except now I had it. In ink. In signature. In Dad's own hand. And next time we were in court, Tyler wouldn't be the only one wearing a suit. You don't just walk into court with a folder and hope for justice. You prepare for war. And when you're up against someone like Tyler, a master of image, manipulation, and smiling through deception, you don't just need evidence. You need a strategy. A plan that unfolds like chess, not checkers. So that's what I did, piece by piece. The next morning, Maggie and I met at her apartment, a cramped studio above a vegan bakery. Walls lined with law books and sticky notes in every shade of neon. She had already printed out 3 copies of Dad's final will. Notarized. Signed. Witnessed. This, she said, tapping the folder, is the foundation. But if we go in with just this, they'll stall it. Challenge mental capacity. Push for handwriting analysis. Drag it out. They'll say he was confused, that he was coerced. She nodded. Exactly. So we need more. We made a list. Timeline of Dad's final month. Witnesses to his clarity and intent. Proof Tyler actively suppressed the original delivery. Anything that showed motive, financial gain. Control. Manipulation. And we had a ticking clock. The probate hearing was just 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to dismantle the version of the truth Tyler had spent years constructing. I started with the business. Dad's woodworking company, Miller Craft & Co., was a small but loyal operation. 5 employees, mostly old-timers. One of them, a guy named Ron, had worked with Dad for 15 years. When I showed up, Ron gave me a look I'll never forget. Thought you were gone, he muttered. I wasn't. He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. Yeah, that's what your dad said too. We talked in the break room. I asked about Dad's last few visits, about any changes in company paperwork. That's when Ron leaned in. Tyler came by the week after your dad passed. Said the company was being streamlined. Told us new contracts were being drafted. My stomach dropped. New contracts. Ownership transfer forms. Said the will gave him full control. He paused. But your dad told me just 2 weeks before that you were taking over. Said you had vision. Integrity. I exhaled slowly. Did he say that? He did. Then he gave me this. Ron reached into his locker and handed me a small envelope, old, crinkled, but sealed. Inside was a printed note from Dad. Short. To the point. Ron, if anything happens to me before this gets sorted, trust James. He knows what matters here. Another thread. I copied it, scanned it, and added it to the growing file. Meanwhile, Maggie was working her own angle. She dug into the courier logs, filed FOIA requests, even reached out to the notary who'd witnessed Dad's signature. Her name was April Retired. Mid-60s. Sweet as pie with a memory like a steel trap. Walter. Oh, sure. He was sharp, little shaky in the hands. But the man knew exactly what he was signing. He even cracked a joke, said, "Hope this is the last draft. Or James is gonna inherit a headache." Estimate. Maggie asked if she'd testify. April didn't even blink. Of course. But the biggest crack came 2 days later in the form of an email. Subject line. You deserve to know. No name. No signature. Just a burner address. The body. A screenshot. A conversation between Tyler and Eliza. It read, Tyler, the cabin's off the grid. He'll never check there. Eliza, you better make sure. If he finds the folder, this all blows up. Tyler, he won't. He's not that strategic. Eliza, still. Erase whatever's in the hospice records. Doctor knows too much. My hands went cold. There it was. Not suspicion. Proof. They hadn't just blocked the will. They conspired to erase it. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. Documents spread across the table like pieces of a battlefield. The hoodie lay draped over the chair across from me, quiet, constant. I looked at the photo from the cabin again. Me and Dad on the dock. Sunlight bouncing off the lake. A moment no one could forge. No one could erase. This wasn't about property anymore. It was about legacy, truth, and the son he trusted to carry it forward. Then Maggie called. There's one more thing, she said, her voice tense. What now? I got a copy of the initial capacity report Tyler used to override the will. Okay. It's signed by Dr. Kavanaugh. But here's the thing. She never treated your dad. What? She's a plastic surgeon. She's Eliza's friend. The line went quiet for a second as it sank in. They used a non-treating physician, likely coached, to sign off on Dad's supposed mental incompetence. That report was what gave Tyler legal leverage to block the courier delivery. Maggie's voice sharpened. That's fraud. James. Medical fraud. With that, we don't just contest the will. We go to the DA. I stood, adrenaline pumping. This is how they win. By counting on people not noticing, not fighting back. She nodded through the phone. But you noticed. And I'm fighting. We filed the motion the next day, along with affidavits from April, from Ron, from the hospice nurse Colleen. We submitted the forged report, the email thread, the notarized will, and the recording Dad had made on Maggie's phone the day he'd whispered, "James will protect the truth." We didn't just file for a probate pause. We filed for fraudulent interference with estate proceedings, and we requested an emergency hearing. It was granted. Tyler found out within 48 hours. He showed up at my door, unannounced. Dressed sharp, fake calm, that same brotherly tone he always used when he was cornered. "James," he said. "You sure you want to do this?" "You mean seek the truth?" "Yeah." "Pretty sure?" He chuckled. "Come on. You're better than this. Let's handle it like family." "You already did," I replied, holding up a printout of the email thread. "And I saw exactly what kind of family you mean." His smile cracked. He turned, about to leave, but paused. Then he muttered something under his breath. "I'll never forget." "You think people care about the truth?" He looked back at me. "They care about the story, and I control the story." I closed the door, sat back down, opened my laptop, and began writing the real story. Not just for court, but for the world. Because Tyler may have owned the version people saw, but I held the version people would believe. Courtrooms are colder than they look on TV. Not just in temperature and tone. The walls are beige. The lighting's unforgiving. And everything smells faintly of disinfectant and old paper. It's the kind of place where truth has to wear a tie and speak softly or risk being dismissed. And yet, that's exactly where I was, facing the people who had erased me. The morning of the hearing, I put on Dad's hoodie under my blazer, not for style, for grounding, for armor. Maggie smiled when she saw it. "It's poetic," she said, handing me the file, the son he chose, wearing the memory they tried to bury. We walked through the courthouse doors, like two underdogs stepping into the lion's den. And waiting for us on the other bench were Tyler and Eliza. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my rent. Hair perfect. Smile calibrated. Eliza, beside him, looked like a Chanel ad that had been dipped in condescension. They didn't wave, just stared. Game face. But this wasn't a game anymore. The judge was sharp, gray-bearded, with eyes that could cut through stories like glass. "Mr. Miller," he said, scanning the file Maggie submitted. "You've filed a petition to contest the will currently on file for your late father, Walter J. Miller, citing suppression of a revised will and fraudulent interference in estate execution. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you have evidence?" "Yes, sir," Maggie replied. "Signed affidavits, notarized will, communication logs, and medical irregularities." Tyler's lawyer, a polished man named Grant, leaned forward, voice dripping with artificial calm. "Your Honor, this feels like a desperate attempt to undermine a grieving family. My clients only want peace." Maggie didn't even blink. "We all want peace, but not when it's built on fraud." The first witness we called was April, the notary. She walked slowly to the stand, but her voice was clear. Walter was fully alert. He signed that will in front of me, made jokes about chili and cabins. No confusion. No coercion. Grant tried to twist her words. "But you're not a medical professional." "Are you?" "No," she said. "I'm just someone who spent 40 years recognizing when people know what they're doing." Score one. Next up was Ron, from the shop. He brought the letter Dad had written, the one that said, "Trust James." Grant tried to undermine him too. "Isn't it possible Walter was just venting?" Ron looked him dead in the eye. He didn't vent. He planned. He was handing the torch. "You just don't like who he handed it to." Score two. Then came the twist. Maggie submitted the forged medical declaration, the one signed by Dr. Kavanaugh, a plastic surgeon. The judge's eyebrows lifted for the first time all day. You're telling me the capacity override used to block the revised will came from someone who doesn't practice internal medicine or geriatrics? Yes, Your Honor, Maggie said calmly. And she's a personal friend of the respondent's mother, Mrs. Eliza Miller. That landed like a punch. Eliza stiffened. Tyler's jaw twitched. The judge turned toward them. Would you care to respond? Tyler's lawyer stammered. We weren't aware of Dr. Kavanaugh's specialty. But Eliza leaned in toward the mic. She was available. That's all. The judge's silence was heavy. And then Maggie brought out the final blow. The email thread. The one where Tyler and Eliza plotted to keep the will hidden. We didn't even have to say much. The judge read it aloud. The cabin's off the grid. He'll never check there. Silence. Then, still, erase whatever's in the hospice records. Doctor knows too much. Oh. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even Grant looked rattled now. And when I looked over at Tyler, his hands were clenched so tightly, his knuckles had gone white. The judge called for a short recess. Maggie and I stepped into the hallway, hearts racing. You see his face? She asked. Yeah, I said. He knows it's crumbling. She nodded. But we're not done. We returned to the courtroom. This time, it was my turn to speak. I took the stand, swore in, and then I looked at the judge and told him everything. How I'd stayed by Dad's side. How I found the affidavit. The hoodie. The receipt. The photo. How they tried to digitize his memory and erase mine. How legacy isn't a trophy, it's a responsibility. I paused, reached into my inner pocket, and pulled out the sketch Dad had left in the hoodie, the cabin, penciled in his shaky hand. He didn't draw this because he was confused, I said. He drew this because it was real, because it mattered, because he still believed in peace, even when surrounded by people who wanted control. I held it up. This is the man they said had lost his mind. Silence. Even Eliza looked away. The judge sat back. Then he spoke. This court finds substantial grounds to delay execution of the current will and begin formal proceedings to validate the revised will presented. Maggie exhaled. The courtroom stirred. But then came the second twist. Tyler stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement. His lawyer's head snapped toward him, surprised, nervous. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. Tyler walked to the front, slow, jaw tight. I didn't think any of this would come to light, he said. Maggie tensed beside me. Tyler went on. I didn't mean to. Erase James. I just didn't think he'd fight back. He turned to me. You were always quiet. Always the one sitting in the corner while I ran the show. I thought you'd stay in your place. He paused, then muttered. I guess you finally stood up. The judge leaned forward. Is that an admission? Mr. Miller. Tyler said nothing, then sat down. His lawyer buried his face in his hands. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I had just returned from war. But this wasn't victory. Not yet. Because Eliza wasn't finished. And the cabin. It was no longer just a symbol. It was the next battleground. Grief is supposed to end with peace. A eulogy. A burial. Maybe some closure if you're lucky. But for me, grief was just the opening act. What followed was a war of shadows. Of smiling enemies. Of threats and polite packaging. And in that war, Eliza was just getting started. A week after the court ruled in my favor, I got a notice taped to my apartment door. A cease and desist from Eliza's legal team. Claimed I was harassing a grieving widow by pursuing an unsubstantiated and defamatory claim. Underneath the legalese, it was a message. Back off. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about court anymore. It was about character. Mine. My dad's. And hers. Maggie and I regrouped at her place. The stress was etched into her shoulders. But her eyes still burned with purpose. She's not done, Maggie said. She'll appeal. Drag it out. She's already trying to get the cabin declared off limits until title's properly reviewed. That place is your father's legacy. I looked down at the hoodie in my lap. I hadn't washed it. Still smelled like cedar and old sweat. Still wrapped around me like armor. Eliza doesn't want the property, I said. She wants to destroy anything that proves he wanted me to have it. That weekend, I drove up to Echo Ridge again. Alone this time. The air was different. Still. Too still. When I pulled up the gravel drive, the front door was ajar. I stepped out of the car slowly. No signs of forced entry. But something was wrong. Very wrong. Inside, drawers were pulled out. Photo frames were face down. The folder with Dad's documents gone. I ran through every room. Nothing taken but that. Not the antique tools. Not the backup laptop. Just the folder. And taped to the fridge with a kitchen knife, a yellow Post-it. 5 words. Let it go. James. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't bluffing. I called Maggie. Call the cops, she said immediately. I can't prove it was them. You think anyone else broke into your dead dad's cabin just to steal a folder only we knew about? Silence. Then Maggie whispered, They're desperate. I whispered back. Good. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I went back to the dock, the same wooden platform where Dad taught me to fish when I was 8. Where we once watched a meteor shower, and he said, The stars don't lie. That's why people hate them. I sat there in the dark, wind pushing against my jacket, and that's when I saw the outline of a car, headlights off, parked on the road above the cabin. Watching. I didn't move. Just stared back. Whoever it was didn't get out. After a few minutes, the car slowly backed away. Message received. But they'd made a mistake. They thought intimidation would break me. Instead, it made me bolder. The next morning, I filed a police report. Clean and clinical. Then I called Channel 6 local news. Told them I had a story about estate fraud, medical conspiracy, and a forged will in a legacy Denver family. The producer called me back in 30 minutes. We're listening? She said. 2 days later, I was sitting under bright lights in a cramped studio, retelling everything I've just told you. With receipts, with documents, with emotion. And I brought the hoodie, held it up on camera. This, I said, is the last thing my father ever gave me. Not money, not property, just this something that kept him warm when no one else was around. I paused. And now, I'm giving him something back? His name. The segment aired that night and exploded. Thousands of views, comments, people sharing their own stories of being erased, silenced, written out by the people who claim to love them. Tyler disabled his Instagram. Eliza's law firm issued a vague statement about respecting due process. But behind closed doors, they were fuming. Then, just when things seemed to settle, another twist. Maggie texted me. Check your email. Now, I opened it. Subject line. Anonymous submission. Inside, a link to a private audio file. Dad's voice. Crackly. Weak. But unmistakable. If something happens, James knows the truth. Tyler, he's not what he pretends. Eliza. She's rewriting things. Don't let them bury me before I'm gone. Then silence. I couldn't breathe. I forwarded it to Maggie. She called instantly. James, where did that come from? I have no idea. You think it's real? I swallowed hard. I know it is. The audio was time-stamped. 1 week before Dad died. Clean metadata. Unedited. We submitted it to the court as supplemental evidence, and within 48 hours, Eliza's legal team requested a settlement discussion. That's when I knew. They were cracking, but even in surrender, they played dirty. They offered a payout hefty, more than the value of the cabin and business combined. On one condition, drop all public claims, silence the story. Let the world believe their version. I looked across the table at Tyler, still smug behind his fake humility. Eliza, calm, cool, as if this were a negotiation and not the aftermath of betrayal. Then I spoke. You already tried to erase my father. You think I'm going to help you finish the job? I slid the offer back across the table. No deal. The next day, I returned to the cabin one last time, walked inside, stood in the center of the room and breathed. Then I found Dad's old toolbox, still under the bench. I pried open the false bottom. Inside, a thumb drive, labeled in his handwriting. Legacy, play only if needed. I plugged it into my laptop. It was a video. Dad, sitting on the cabin porch, weak, but smiling. I don't know who'll find this, but if it's you, James, then I did something right. He coughed, looked out at the trees. This place, this life, it's yours. Always was. And if they try to rewrite that, remind them. He looked straight into the camera. Miller, men make their way. The thing about justice is, it doesn't feel like fireworks. It's quiet, uneven, like a bruise healing under your skin. You don't notice it until you finally press, and there's no pain. That's what the final court ruling felt like. The judge affirmed my father's revised will as legally binding. Tyler and Eliza were formally sanctioned for attempted fraud and interference. The cabin, the business, and most importantly, my father's legacy were all officially transferred to me. They didn't show up for the last hearing. Not even a lawyer. Just silence. The day I signed the deed, I brought the hoodie. Not for drama. For Dad. I sat in the county clerk's office, pen shaking just a little. Not from fear, from the weight of it all. I hereby accept full legal ownership. I paused. Then I signed. One line, one signature, and years of doubt erased. Outside, Maggie was waiting. She handed me a coffee and a grin. You did it. I looked at the document, then back at her. No, we did. She bumped her shoulder into mine. You gonna tell the world? I already did, I said, tapping my phone. Episode scheduled to drop in 10 minutes. That night, I uploaded the final video. The echo that remains. I told everything. Not just the legal twists, the betrayals, the forged signatures, but the quiet parts. How grief distorts everything. How silence becomes its own kind of abuse. How family can love you and still fail you. And how you can love them and still walk away. And then I played the clip. The video Dad left me, his raspy voice, his face aged but clear-eyed. And those words, Miller men make their way, that wasn't a motto. That was permission. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments. People who had been cut from wills. People who had lost their fathers to control-freak siblings or greedy second spouses. People who had never had a father at all, but found something healing in the fight for mine. One woman wrote, You gave your dad the dignity they tried to erase. That's the best kind of justice. Another said, you didn't just win. You exposed a lie people pretend doesn't happen. And then came a message that made me freeze. From Maya, my daughter. Just one sentence. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time. Maya, the same girl who once posted that cruel joke on Instagram, who echoed Eliza's poison without knowing it, who hadn't spoken to me since the brunch I wasn't invited to. And now, a crack. I didn't know what I'd say, but I knew I'd answer. Because healing doesn't always start with a hug. Sometimes, it starts with a question. A month passed. I moved into the cabin full-time, fixed the leaky roof, refinished the porch swing, reopened Dad's workshop under the original name, Miller & Son. We added a new sign burned into oak and hung it right above the front door. Truth lives here. Then, one Sunday afternoon, a car pulled into the gravel lot. Out stepped a teenage girl in a hoodie. Maya. She held something wrapped in a cloth. She walked up, quiet, eyes unsure. I found this in Mom's attic, she said. I thought you should have it. She handed it to me. Inside the cloth, Dad's pocket watch, the one he wore every day of his life. The one Eliza claimed was lost during the estate shuffle. I swallowed hard. You kept this. I didn't know what it was, until I heard the video. She looked down. I used to think you were weak, just invisible. But now, I see it. You're not invisible. Dad, you were just carrying too much alone. I didn't say anything. I just pulled her into a hug. Tight. The kind where you don't need words. In the months that followed, we rebuilt slowly. Maya started spending weekends at the cabin. She helped varnish the old canoe, asked questions about Grandpa. We cooked Chili Dad's recipe, slightly burnt like always. And each time, I felt something click back into place. Not perfection, not fairy tale reconciliation, just repair. Tyler. He vanished from the public eye. Eliza filed for bankruptcy. And the last I heard, she was trying to sue her lawyer for emotional negligence. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Because revenge wasn't the point. Restoration was, I still wear the hoodie sometimes. Especially on cold mornings when the fog rolls in thick over Echo Ridge and the lake looks like it's holding its breath. On those days, I sit at the edge of the dock, thermos in hand, and I listen. Not for voices, not for ghosts, just for echoes. Because some legacies aren't loud. They don't shout. They whisper. And if you're still enough, you'll hear them say, keep going. You're doing just fine. And one last thing. That anonymous email, the one that first exposed Tyler and Eliza's plan. Months later, I traced the IP address. Guess who it came from? Trisha, Eliza's own sister. But that's a story for another time. Let me know in the comments if you want to hear her side. Until then, stay grounded. And remember, truth always finds a way home.